I'm going to start today's review with an apology, and that's to any of you and all of you out there that speak Chinese. I'm really sorry. I'm going to have 2 or maybe 3 different words in here that I don't know the correct pronunciations for, and it's very hard to find information online about how to pronounce some of these words because it depends on the context in which they're being said, I believe. So I apologize up front. I'm going to do my best to not butcher your language, and apologies for the fact that I'm inevitably going to do so. With that said though, let's talk today about what I think could be one of the very, very best budget IEMs on the market at the moment. And that's the Tangzhou Princess Chang'e. I want to send a huge thanks to Andy from Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio for sending me the Princess Chang'e. Something else I wanted to talk about in this video are the tips that you can actually buy bundled with the Princess Chang'e, and you'll be able to buy them separately as well, I believe. And these are the Tang Sankai tips. And so this video is really about 2 things, and I'm going to keep it as short as I can because there's not a lot to say, but what is going to be said is all pretty good. And that is that we've got a very, very good budget IEM and some very, very good budget tips. Let's talk really briefly about the tips because there's very little to say. These are a silicon tip. They're in the same vein as so many others on the market, but for me, I really like their design because it's a bit different. If you've seen my old tip rolling video that I did way back, you'll know that my view of tips is that it's all about finding the right tip for the right IEM for your ears. And what I mean by that is that on one particular pair of IEMs, one particular tip might work well, but on a different IEM, you might need a different tip. And that's where it's great to see an affordable, high quality set of tips like the Tang Sankai. So these are a $12 set of tips. There's 3 in the packet here. I don't know what variations there are. Check out the links down below to see what options you can buy. But the key thing is that you're going to get a set of about 3 tips by the look of it for around $12, which is way cheaper than some of my other favorites, being things like the JVC Spiral Dots, the Final Audio E-Type tips, and of course Spinfits. These are much cheaper, but they still seem to be a high quality silicon, and what I really like about them is that they've got this interesting textured style design. So the outer edge of the silicon is actually rough like sandpaper. Now it's not rough in the sense that it's going to hurt your ears because it's all made of soft silicon, but the point is it's not a completely smooth surface. And for whatever reason, I find that works really well for certain IEMs to be a nice, clean, simple insert. It's comfortable to wear for long periods of time, and it still seems to seal really well. And so I'm not going to sit here and say these are going to make your IEM sound better or worse than any other particular tip. I still use a combination of the Final E-Type, the Tang Sankai, and also the Spinfits and Spiral Dots. It all depends on the IEM that I'm using. I think Final Audio E-Type is still my absolute go-to favourite, but I reckon these are coming in a pretty close second along with the JVC Spiral Dots and Spinfits. So I'd put these at about the same tier. In case you're wondering, I'm not so much of a fan of the spring tips from Moondrop. That's just a personal preference thing. They're a lovely feeling and looking tip. They just don't fit well for me. But I wanted to put these into the context that in my mind, despite their cheap price, they're an excellent tip and a great one to add to your collection because on some IEMs, they might be better than some of those other favourites. On top of that, depending on the retailers you go to perhaps, and this might also be a limited time thing, at the time that I was writing up this review, I was also finding that you can buy the Princess Chang'e IEM and have it actually bundled with the Tang Sankai for way less, like a few $. So that's a great way to try out these tips and try out a great IEM, assuming you like what I'm about to say about the sound of the Princess Chang'e. Based on my hunting around the internet, it looks like the Chang'e are going to sit at around about $15 depending on the retailer that you go to, and obviously different countries, the pricing is going to vary. So if you look at Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio, who were kind enough to send me these, link in the description down below of course, if you do look at their website, what you'll find is the price is going to be in Australian dollars, and it may not directly align with that $15. That's because of import duties, taxes, tariffs, etc. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of the international pricing, but think of these as around about a $15 to $20 IEM. What you're getting for that relatively small amount of money is a decent enough looking and feeling IEM. They're not going to set the world on fire with their design. I think aesthetically they're really interesting. They've got a very traditional Chinese kind of aesthetic to them. But it is worth noting a few things. One of them is that they're what you could call a bullet style design, meaning that they're a straight barrel with a nozzle at the end, so they are going to stick out of the ear a little bit. On top of that, you've got a cable, which is a decent enough cable, but it's physically connected, so there's no replacement for cables, there's no swapping and rolling cables. And the ones I have here do have a remote control, I think. Yes, there is a little button in there, remote control and a microphone. I don't know if there's different variations available of these. Often you can buy some of these with and without the mic, with a small price difference. But either way, it's a fairly simple basic setup. The cable, as I said, is fine. The IEMs are made of metal, which is nice, but they are that bullet style, which I know doesn't suit people. And so they're not going to set the world on fire with their design and necessarily their aesthetics and their comfort, although they are perfectly comfortable for a bullet style IEM. But where things get interesting is when you take a look at what's going on inside and how they perform. What's happening inside each of the IEM housings of the Princess Chandler is a pair of 6mm dynamic drivers. What I mean is there's one per side, so it's a single dynamic driver IEM per casing, and those drivers are a 16 ohm driver with just 96 decibel sensitivity. So these are not a particularly sensitive IEM. It's not a problem. You're still going to be able to drive them from a smartphone, a dongle, any device you like. But it's worth noting that they're going to take a little bit more volume than your average IEM. Don't let anybody tell you that you have to have these paired up with a powerful amplifier or that they take an amplifier to sound their best. That's rubbish. What you will find though, as with any IEM, is that the better the quality of the source, the better the quality of the sound. That might also happen to mean you've got more power on tap, but it's never about the power. IEMs, in every single case that I've ever come across, do not need more power. But anyway, I'll get off the soapbox on that one. Let's talk about the actual performance of these. And start off by saying that their sound quality is nothing short of wonderful for the price. And it all starts with a very, very good tuning. The result is wonderful tonal balance across the board from these. And realistically, the only issues that I can kind of level at them is that they do lack just a little bit of refinement. But in terms of tonal balance, they're great. In terms of spatial information, so soundstage size, separation of instruments, they're excellent there as well for a budget IEM, and that's really key. These are not going to outperform more expensive IEMs, but they're absolutely going to hold their own against some of the other budget contenders. So if you think about other IEMs that are great and affordable from brands like CCA or Blon, for my money, these are right up there next to them. KZ comes to mind as well. These are absolutely as good or maybe better than any of those others that I've tried. And again, this is a personal preference thing, so I'm not going to say they are better. I'm saying they're right up there. They compete really well. For me, I would happily reach for these over Blon BL01s, Blon BL03s. Not that they're better, but I would happily choose them if I had both in front of me. It would be a bit of a coin toss as to which I chose. Speaking about the Blons though, these are going to fit much more easily and consistently for most people, so there's that. But as is always the case, comfort, preferences of tonality, it is going to be debatable as to which one you think is the best. But I think for the $15 to $20 odd US you're going to spend on these, they're absolutely worth adding to a collection, even if you've got something like the Blons, the CCAs, the KZs, etc. If you're a collector of budget IEMs, these I think should be in your collection. Because it's not often you see an IEM with such excellent tonal balance all the way from bass through treble. As I said, refinement is a little bit questionable on these, but that's true for almost every other budget IEM. The other thing that does define these as a budget IEM rather than a high-end IEM, other than the price of course, is that resolution and detail retrieval is also at a lower level. And these are all things that are common and expected with lower level IEMs. It's worth mentioning at this point though that it also depends on the source you're using it with. Your system is only ever going to be as good as its weakest link. So if you do have yourself, say, a budget dongle or a fairly budget audio device of some sort, maybe you're plugging directly into a smartphone, then something like the Princess Chandler might be as much as you ever need. You might not be able to hear a difference between these and the more expensive ZYAN Woo if your source isn't up to the task of extracting more. And I say that not to knock people using lower level devices, because ultimately you should use whatever's at hand, whatever you can enjoy music from. My point is that these are going to be absolutely enough for many, many people because they're just so good. They're a wonderful sounding IEM. And so to put that into context, let me give you two quick comparisons between the Princess Chandler and other IEMs just to show you what I mean about where they sit and how they perform. Another budget IEM that I really enjoy is the Tin Hi-Fi T2. And the T2 costs just a little bit more than the Princess Chandler. It's a design that's in some ways looks and feels a bit more kind of special, a bit more premium. It's got a detachable MMCX cable, which is nice. But at the same time, I don't find them necessarily as comfortable or as easy to get a secure fit as the bullet design of the Princess Chandler. When it comes to sound comparisons though, they're both excellent but different, so let me describe that for you now. And one of the tracks that I used for this was This World by Sela Sue. Starting off with the Princess Chang'e, everything sounded great, the vocals were clean, the bass was very solid and present, and tonally everything sounded just great, as I've already kind of explained about these. The tonal accuracy, the tonal kind of realism of these, I would say is absolutely fantastic, based on my ears and also, which I did afterwards, my measurements as well. Where I did find a shortcoming in the Chang'e is that things like the cymbals and percussion in this track were just a little bit lacking in refinement from these. As I said before, that's where you start to hear the shortcomings of budget IEMs, is that they just sometimes have a little bit of roughness around the edges, particularly in the upper registers. And that's true here. These don't have harsh treble or overly prominent treble. They've got enough to be kind of clear, articulate and detailed, but they just lack that little bit of refinement that you start to get as you spend more money on IEMs. Moving over to the Tin Hi-Fi T2, and you get a completely different presentation. The T2 has a brighter upper mid-range, it's going to deliver you more texture in the sound, and that could be good or bad depending on you. As a result of that tonal shift, you're going to get more sense of kind of focus and clarity in the imaging from the T2s, but the overall tonality to my ears isn't as complete. You're trading off that little bit of focus and clarity for a loss of the bottom end, the body, the weight, the presence in the sound. The T2, with its tuning and its general performance, does also provide a little bit more sense of detail in the sound and a tiny bit more sense of space and separation. But interestingly, it also places the imaging and the soundstage a bit more inside the head. I feel like the Princess Chang'e is able to project the sound just a little bit further forward. It gives me a little bit more sense that the sound is not entirely encased inside my forehead. Whereas I think with the T2, even though there's more space between sounds, maybe a little bit more width overall in the soundstage, it all occurs more inside my head. And so some of you might like one over the other. I think they're both excellent IEMs. But what I'd say is that if you generally find yourself aligning with my taste on IEMs, I think you're going to like the tonality of the Princess Chang'e probably better than you're going to like the T2. On the other hand, if you're a fan of detail, texture, resolution, and a generally brighter, or some might say leaner or more neutral tonality, then in that case, you may find yourself preferring the T2. It's hard to go wrong with either, but this really helped to position for me the fact that the Princess Chang'e is an absolutely outstanding IEM at the price and in the current market. And so I'm not going to labour the point any further. The IEMs are starting to unravel themselves. They're clearly done with this review. So I'm going to wrap things up here by saying once again, a huge thanks to Andy from Melbourne Tri-Fi Audio. These have been a real eye-opener for me and have jumped all the way to the top of my budget IEM recommendation list, alongside probably things like the BLO3 still, but these are probably my 1A to some of those others that are the 1B. And so thanks to Andy and Melbourne Tri-Fi Audio. Check out the links down below if you're in Australia. There's no affiliation here. I make no money if you use those links. But I'll also put some international links as well for those of you outside Australia. Suffice to say, this is one I recommend picking up. But beyond that, I'm going to leave it here and hope that you found this video useful, helpful and informative. As a reminder, don't forget about the fantastic Tang Senkai chips. As a reminder, don't forget about the fantastic Tang Senkai chips. As a reminder, don't forget about the fantastic Tang Senkai tips as well. I have to say that one really carefully. I've just botched it 3 or 4 times in a row. And so if you found this video useful, interesting, informative, if I've introduced you to something new that you're excited about, then do hit the like button and subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. But for now, let me leave you to the music. So happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.